Good morning, everyone. My name is Harold Rickenbacker. I work for the Environmental Defense Fund of our Washington, D.C. office. Thanks again for the opportunity to present today at the virtual A6 meeting. Without further ado, I'll jump right into my presentation. I don't feel like I need to drill down too much on the statistics here for this audience, as we all know the impact that air pollution has on public health. But just to put in context, we breathe on average about 11,000 liters of air per day. All right, so a lot of air in comparison to how much we drink and how much we eat. The air we breathe has really an impact on our health and productivity. Right now, conventional air monitoring or sensor networks aren't evenly distributed across communities. On average, there is a global mean distance of 137 miles per PM 2.5 monitor. And that number is even more sparse across low and middle income countries, but also in rural parts of the US. In addition to these monitors being spaced out several miles apart, they often aren't installed on buildings, or they are installed on buildings high above the air that people actually breathe. So again, may not be reflective of resuspension trends or inhalation dose, and makes it much harder to link to health and cancer risks and the like. But we at EDF like to call hyperlocal mapping as a means of making that invisible visible. And when we use the term hyperlocal, we mean air pollution at high spatial resolution, so different concentrations every 30 to 60 meters, and also at high temporal resolution, so different minutes and seconds rather than hourly or daily trends. Unlike conventional monitoring, hyperlocal monitoring actually produces this block by block visibility, which can pinpoint hotspots and really give local leaders the real-time data to tailor interventions and policies that clean the air in the communities they live. Now, when we think about hyperlocal mapping, there are a number of ways that these impacts or the data can be used to drive policy and action in your community. It could be investigation or enforcement, so things like factories and other stationery and legacy point sources. It could be used for emergency public health interventions, so when a lot of our networks are offline during natural disasters, these kind of mobile and low-cost sensing platforms can be used to collect data on wildfires, ozone action days, and the like. But also just looking at transportation infrastructure, right? So informing where we design transportation projects, or where we implement no idling restrictions or in traffic rerouting in communities. The list really reads on, and what we do at EDF is really put emphasis on data to action. So it's not enough to have a one-off air pollution monitoring project that collects data, but that there should be some policy or clean air solution attached to the data. In cities across the globe, we're showing how hyperlocal insights can improve the microgrid networks and provide more accurate identification of hotspots. Our most recent work combines pollution measurements and meteorological data, better known as source apportionment, to pinpoint elevated pollution in Salt Lake City, where our work in China actually is a mobile monitoring challenge, where we include, or cities include, low-cost sensors on drones, taxis, and commercial vehicles. So over the next half of the presentation, I'll spend the majority of the time just giving a glimpse, snapshot view of some of our various projects in Oakland, Houston, and London. For those who may not be familiar with Oakland or the Bay Area in California, this project is really impactful because there's a lot of sources within this community. It's enclosed by 3 major freeways. It's downwind from the Port of Oakland, experiences a lot of high truck volume, and has many industrial facilities kind of nestled among residential homes. In West Oakland, we work closely with the city and nonprofits to develop a resident-led effort to utilize hyperlocal data to influence public plans and policies. This is a partnership that we developed in conjunction with, many universities, research institutions, but most important, I would say, is working closely with community-based organizations and grassroots organizations on the ground to really move forward the data and put it into action. We work closely with the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. Again, is a resident-led community-based organization with extensive history of carrying out their own research and having led policy and advocacy in Oakland for decades. We look to them to provide perspectives on residents who lived in these diesel pollution kind of polluted areas, but also moving forward as key community liaisons and policy experts, leading the charge on using this data to drive action. Just briefly, we were able to pinpoint impact zones in our community, in this community, before we came in with this robust mobile monitoring platform and stationary monitoring of black carbon. There was only one regulatory monitor in this community. EDF led this mapping project in conjunction with Google Street View cars and was able to pinpoint, on average, in different block levels, PM and other concentrations of 8 times higher, and varying in a factor of 8 throughout the neighborhood. This, again, was very unique because it gave us a glimpse or a better understanding of exposure pathways that validated lived experience of community members. And that work really, pivoted forward when we were able to overlay it with health records from Kaiser Permanente in their research division. We collected close to 40,000 health data, and it came back to show that elderly residents within West Oakland were actually at a 40% greater risk of cardiovascular disease from being exposed to higher concentrations of NO2. This was only a starting point. The work really moved forward when the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project used some of that data to inform the Port of Oakland's plan to transition to zero-emission seaport. Use that data to further validate the city's current truck management plan, but also the West Oakland group was selected as one of the first Bay Area communities to complete a community air plan under California's new air quality management legislation, AB 617, which calls for emission and exposure reduction in communities that are most impacted by air pollution. Working in West Oakland, Houston, for those who may not know, is known for its massive petrochemical facilities, less than 50 miles away from the Gulf of Mexico, which means it's kind of a prime area to be impacted by hurricanes. Those two factors actually collided in September of 2017, where Hurricane Harvey devastated portions of the Texas coast. City leaders and public health officials identified elevated levels of benzene after Hurricane Harvey, from damages to one of the region's largest petrochemical facilities. And what's interesting and what's unique here is most of those industrial facilities were unprepared for the storm, but additionally, a lot of their reporting was offline because of lack of electricity and so forth and so on. We were able to use mobile sensing platforms to really do these hotspot testing and monitoring and respond to complaints from residents of different odors in this community. 2 independent sets of benzene measurements were taken and discovered concentration exceeding 300 parts per billion. In conclusion, it was close to 6 significant benzene plumes identified near this refinery, which was above kind of that fence line standard. Based on increased media coverage through the One Breath partnership in Houston and a lot of on-the-ground advocacy and work from the EDF and other local organizations, the city of Houston actually was able to receive the disaster planning funds to acquire and deploy permanent mobile monitoring platforms. And the city has worked to coordinate efforts to develop a decision tree based on toxicity data, and using this to be incorporated in actual federal disaster management plans and policies. So again, just another example of a city really taking action on air pollution through policy development and enactment and really using data to inform those decisions. Building on our work in the U.S., EDF, along with the Mayor of London and other leading health and science experts, launched Breathe London, one of the more robust and ambitious projects across the world. You may ask, why London? Well, they had a well-established, reference grade monitoring network as well as pollution modeling in place. but also proactive leadership. And I want to stress that because a challenge often for policymakers is that there's no one single solution that can solve the air pollution problem, and no one single department in cities that has all the necessary levers, right? So air quality investments should be driven by potential or realized cost savings and co-benefits rather than by political pressure alone. Solutions to problems the government is already addressing is another thing that's key. So again, really zooming in on this co-benefits discussion. The initiative has three major components: a network of 100 air sensor pods deployed throughout London to complement the existing network. Also, these pods were placed to fill gaps in the existing network. They were ensured a minimum of one AQ pod per borough in London, and also focused on schools and other sensitive receptors for locations. The accuracy of the Breathe London sensors and network was determined by co-location with conventional monitors and comparison with others within that network, and measured for NO2, NOPM, CO2, and in some locations, ozone. The second component was measuring air pollution using two Google Street View cars, which served as mobile platforms, and this was further linked with a study led by King's College deploying wearable sensors at several schools. But it's not just enough to have data, but to digest that data, right? So people need better information on pollution health effects, as well as readily available and understandable air pollution data and analysis. Breathe London launched a website to serve as a new public platform for easily understanding air quality information. This included interactive maps that display current air pollution and past pollution events. And again, really the aim and goal here was to not only test a low-cost network, but can it provide reliable data that supplements or complements the current reference network? Providing this hyperlocal data to the public in an open platform, easy access, and straightforward form was essential. And from that, it really helped assess policies for social apportionment and interventions, which I'll get to in a bit. The findings show that air pollution was dangerously high across the city, and nearly half of the sensor pods were likely to exceed the UK's legal air pollution limits that year. Also measured and found large, alarmingly high NO2 levels near various parking garages, which were actually located near residential areas that lacked networks or monitoring before Breathe London was established. Building on that, operating from late 2018 through 2020, Breathe London aimed to provide data analysis to support the policies and policy evaluations and increased citizen engagement to date. With that being said, they established a ultra low emission zone, which essentially is a fee charged to the most polluting vehicles in central London. The money in the ULEZ is invested in transportation networks and improving air quality in London. So again, investing in capital infrastructure investments to improve clean air. The sensor showed in the ULEZ that it was successful in reducing dangerous emissions and harmful impacts on climate and health. The monitoring in the ULEZ roadside NO2 pollution was reduced by 36% in that zone, which is just great. A separate study or assessment done by Global London Authority showed that from March to September 2019, there was a large reduction in number of older, more polluting and non-compliant vehicles detected in the zone. They saw on average fewer 13,000 vehicles, which was down or a reduction of 38%. Now, as this project progresses, we would hope or we aim that Breathe London data can build more public pressure for ambitious clean air policies at the city and national level. But we're also working with our partners to capture lessons learned and develop resources that can help other cities benefit from this project's finding. With that, I took a look at the attendees that were registered for this virtual meeting, and I wanted to just provide more of a high-level overview of some of our projects rather than diving into some of the core science and data. I think it was just more beneficial for this meeting and convening to again review some of our work and have any follow-up conversations one-on-one with different entities and folks involved on projects in our tune-in today. But with that being said, we launched a how-to guide that really dives into some of our hard-earned trial and error on this hyperlocal work, and it guides local leaders for meaningful action. So take a second to download and access this guide at the link attached here, and then on the left is outlined the different core areas that really speaks to the plus and minuses of using stationery versus mobile, how to co-own projects with community groups, and really talks about the detailed experts and roles of providers and on-the-ground technical support for moving these projects forward. Thank you, and here's my email.